Hello, I am Mamadou Mboj and welcome to the Viewpoint. In today's program, we are sort of in a reflective mood. The TRRC hearings have ended after 871 days of hearing testimonies from witnesses, about 392 witnesses, some of whom had such sobriquets as assassin and mofa. We also heard from people who went through unspeakable, hellish experiences, yet showed extraordinary courage in their adversity. And from the testimonies, I think now we have a good sense of how the institutional collapse and moral crash occurred over the 22 years. But overall, what effect has the whole experience had on us, who were glued to our TVs and radios, watching and listening? Today, I have a woman whose father was among the casualties of Jammeh's killing spree. She is currently the program officer of the Gambia Center for Victims of Human Rights Violations. Aissatou Jammeh, welcome.
Thank you very much.
And I also have here my good friend, Ade Darame. He's TV News editor, also a social and political commentator. He has written a few articles over the years for the BBC on the TRRC. Welcome to the program, Ade
Thank
Darame.
you, pleasure to be here.
Yes. Folks, I do not know where to begin, because when the whole thing ended, I went around asking him, what have we just gone through? Remarkable, given all that we've heard. I think that's going to be my first question to you, as general as that.
Well, I think the entire process of the TRC, especially people that are even not victims, it has affected them. And that is where reconciliation comes in as a whole. A lot of time people tend to hear about reconciliation. So reconciliation has nothing to do with the victims and perpetrator, but it's how we are to reconcile as a country and how these whole process has affected us individually, like country-wise. So this is where we have to reconcile to what happened to us as a country, because all of us are affected in one way or the other, because we've listened to the testimonies. We've been through trauma, because just listening to the gruesome manner in which some of these things have been mentioned is just traumatizing.
Absolutely. And Ade, we've had lots of conversations on this. I remember one time you said, wow, the smiling coast, let the real Gambia please stand up. What was the experience?
And in answer to the question, what have we just gone through? From a professional viewpoint, I'm lucky in the sense that I came here just as they were about to start TRRC, and lucky also in that I'm from Sierra Leone and we went through our own. And I think what we've gone through is something that I think for many people has kind of stripped the veneer from the eyes of many people, and from this smiling coast that we sell. It's given people another aspect of the country and a real aspect of the country, and it's forced us to look at ourselves. And I'll just say quickly, one of the reasons I say this about forcing us to look at ourselves, again, I was fortunate in the sense that when it had started, I made 3 or 4 visits out of the country, and just by pure luck, every time I was coming back, I happened to be sitting next to a Gambian, and we would get to talking about the TRRC. And all of them, to a person, said, of course, you realize that the people who perpetrated these atrocities cannot have been Gambians.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the truth is the opposite of that. All of them were Gambians. Lastly, I think also nobody has been indifferent to it. We have all been riveted by it. We've all been forced to watch and forced to have an opinion about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, I said to you, you lost your father. The trauma started long time ago. So listening to, particularly with that segment, that part where we had the junglers, what was going through your mind?
Well, it was very hard, to be honest with you. If I say it wasn't, I'm lying. But growing up, I always say that I've healed, because it happened to me when I was 14, and then I was put in a situation whereby I had to pretend that everything was okay with me. Going to school, having to, go through school with my friends, and a lot of times, I always have to pretend to be okay. And then after this, the past government, we set up the victim center, and then I started working at the victim center, helping other victims who had gone through the same trauma, the same ordeal that I've been through. So fast forward the testimony of the junglers, I was there sitting, and then well before I even went to the hall, I was like, I think I can deal with this. But in the moment that they started talking about the gruesome manner in which they did it, I was broken down, and they even had to take me out of the hall because of my reaction towards the entire thing. Because like Mr. Drame had said, a lot of the time people tend to tell you, the stories that I will hear was that all these killings were not Gambians that were doing these killings, but seeing a Gambian who sat down on the TV and then talk about the gruesome manner in which he executed these crimes, it was terrible, right? Doing those things to your Gambian fellow, and then somebody that you even had lunch with, somebody who you sit with and eat with, right? So it's unimaginable for me to accept some of these things, because I feel that it's unethical for Gambians to do some of these things, and it's unethical for human beings as a whole to get involved in some of these things.
Absolutely. Yes, some of us are actually guilty of that. We remember we used to talk about what was going on because we were getting snippets of information about what was going on. And yes, we thought that, no, they couldn't possibly be Gambians.
Yeah.
Remarkable.
Indeed, and to pick up on what Aissatou said, I remember very, very clearly the testimony about the killing of her father. And I can say I'm not a Gambian, but in the office, about 10 of us were weeping, myself included, I'm not ashamed to say. And even in the Sierra Leone one, I can't remember that happening to me. I think some of what happened in Gambia was truly gruesome. And from a kind of sort of purely professional standpoint, I made a note, because I was doing an article for the BBC at the time, about 5 occasions when people in the office were reduced to tears. And on 2 or 3 of the occasions, I was one of those people, something that I didn't even think was possible, but just the nature and the barbarity and the gruesomeness and the way they were explicit. These were people who were saying, I did this, I took part in this. They weren't saying somebody else did it. Yeah. They were owning it in front of the public, and people were weeping. And so, that was really something that touched very, very deeply, myself and everybody else. And as I said in reference earlier, nobody was indifferent to it. You couldn't watch and hear what was being said and say, that really was a kind of wake-up call, and I hope it is. At least I hope it is.
Absolutely. And then this pushes on the argument, how did it all happen? Because really, that was the whole point, wasn't it? To find out what actually happened for such cruelties, such gruesome cruelties to occur here, the Smiling Coast.
Well, I think it all happened because of the way we, as Gambians, we tend to slide things under the carpet. Because initially, 1994, when the soldiers that were accused of an alleged coup, so those were the first victims of the former regime. And I think when that happened, it set a starting point of all these human rights violations that happened in the country. So there were no reaction at a point, and then everybody felt, it was just okay for us to, move on as a country. So at that point, if things were being dealt with seriousness, and at that point, if people feel these things could continue, because we as Gambians, I think we make our dictators, right? Because if we had come out in the open and condemn some of those things. Look at the death of Koro Cisse. It had been dragging for 20-something years now. And up to now, no justice been done to what happened to him. So Koro and the 1994 November 11 were the first victims of the dictatorship rule. So it kept happening, it kept happening, it kept happening. And we all know how, everybody was scared, right? People could just come out and then start condemning some of those things, some of these things. But then if you're somebody who has values, most of these, for me personally, I'll just say they lack some of these values. If you've been taxed to kill someone, just say no, you resign, and then go out of the country, and then, start the campaign to fight against it. But that was not the case at that point. It was just order, you do it. Order, you do it. So the former president, got used to the fact that anything I order these people to do something, they always execute it. So it continued and continued up till 22 years. Eventually, we had lost a lot of people, like enforced disappearances, extrajudicial executions, and a lot more.
Absolutely, Adi. I mean, I remember that day vividly. It's just like it happened yesterday, given our age.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just quite remarkable how overnight everybody just supported them. Most people supported them. So one was quite curious, struck by the fact that we were willing to let the constitutional order go. We were making a pact with the devil, it seems, because history was not on our side.
Yeah.
And from the word go, they were killing.
Sure. And I think there's a kind of collusion that happened between the perpetrators and the rest of society. And it became a kind of incremental thing. And just quickly, I'll give two examples in Sierra Leone. In 1967, when we had our first coup d'etat, my father was one of those who'd gone to the Governor General's mansion to be sworn in. And then a rumor went around Freetown that the soldiers had captured them and wanted to take them out of Freetown and execute them. And Freetonians, to a person, we blocked every single access point outside of Freetown. So the soldiers ended up being trapped. Cars were knocked over and burnt to block all the ways, and people refused, absolutely refused, to give them the safe passage to take these people outside of Freetown and kill them. And in the end, there was a kind of revolt within the army. A week later, the army were then deposed. And then the second one was after the 1997 coup d'etat in Sierra Leone, where something similar happened, but slightly different. The military had taken over, they'd kicked out Tijan Kaba, who'd been legally elected, and people refused to go to work for 3 months. It brought the country to its knees. They refused. Nothing like that happened in the Gambia. Because people said, you cannot kill a whole country. If we refuse to go to work, what are you going to do? You cannot kill us all. And the military, of course, had to backtrack. But that kind of uniform action, and it was almost by osmosis. Osmosis. It wasn't as if anybody planned it. People were just revulsed by it, and that revulsion did not happen in the Gambia when the November so-called coup plotters were killed. People should have been revulsed and say, you know what, we are not cooperating with you. We supported your coup initially, but what you have done is a step too far. But once that happened and nothing happened and people did not show their revulsion, the next bad thing happened, and the next, and the next. And so it carried on for 22 years.
Yes, that's exactly it. So this is perhaps at least one lesson we sort of learned. Well, we should have known that. The army is really not the solution. Society, you can have your problems. All societies have their problems. So there was a time when they thought that the army would be this modernizing force.
And because of the so-called discipline.
The so-called discipline. That's it. But the other bit that was curious as well was this sort of complicity from educated people here, people you wouldn't have thought that they would do that. Quite remarkable. When we heard some people, for instance, those who helped draft the decrees, no need to mention names, but quite remarkable there.
I know, it's been quite remarkable, as you said, because we made dictatorships. We made dictators, basically, as Gambians, because when the former president came to power, he had helped, right? Our learned lawyers helped him, basically, to draft some of these laws, the draconian laws and the like. So I think we enabled him from that point. And then he also capitalized on the support that he had from all these laws that was drafted. We've seen how many times the constitution has been changed, right? And still, we are still keeping the same constitution. And a lot of things can't happen because we still do have in the 1997 constitution with all those clauses, right? Like people who were in the junta cannot be prosecuted, mainly with that also constitution. So just to reflect on that, I think we made the former president what he was and what he did in Gambia, because we helped him, we enabled him. You know, there are certain things that he would even do. We'll see people who are educated will come to TV and try to justify that was right. They will justify it, and then they will say, well, he did it because that is the right thing to do. we made him who he was, and we made him how he turned Gambia to be.
Absolutely there. And here I will refer a bit to Professor Abdullah Sen did this commissioned report, quite interesting, that he submitted in June 2020. I think this is what he really had to say there. Let me just read it to you. He knew and used to his advantage ills of the so-called Gambian personality: greed, lust for power, pride, a competitive streak to outdo one another socially and economically.
Absolutely nails it. And you know, what happened became like a poison that ran through the system and infected everything and everybody. And for me, as a non-Gambian, one of the most shocking testimonies I heard, actually, and I remember saying this to a colleague, and he didn't feel it was so shocking, was a supposedly eminent doctor who up to now was defending the bogus treatments that the president meted out on people. And he was saying it was efficacious, and I was appalled. And for somebody, even up to now, to still be defending that nonsense tells you how deep the poison had run through society. And as I said, this person is still viewed as an eminent doctor. And he stood there and talked absolute garbage and defended the indefensible. That tells you everything that was wrong with the society, and almost the kind of refusal to accept by some people what happened and what we saw and what we heard. And even some of the testimonies, there are people who would counter them and said, these people are making it up.
Yeah.
That is the danger.
Yes, there's a lot of denialism around, isn't it? So the kind of whatever loyalties that they have, that would trump the truth.
The truth, every time.
Unbelievable. And when you add to the mix here, we remember how Jammeh milked certain beliefs that he was in power because of God. He added the mysticism into it, and actually, so recently we've even heard a cabinet minister saying that Barrow was put in there by God, and I became very, very scared. The echoes, unbelievable. So you see how we drag God, as it were, into our little antiques and what we need to do.
I think the most important thing for me, personally, I think we are the ones that make our precedents. We're the ones that break our precedents. So if we see them as a living God, we'll worship them, right? And we have our votes. We vote them in power, right? And if they're in power, they need to do things the right way, right? But if we start seeing them as godly, like, they would also feel that they could trample on anybody's rights, right? Because I'm being seen as a god. I can do anything to my worshippers, I'll call them. So I think it's important that we separate the two. If anybody that comes into power, our votes put the person there, right? We put the person there. So I think we need to separate the two, so as to, going forward, for them to feel that, yes, I am here because of people voted for me, right? I'm here because Gambians are the ones who put me as a president. So I should lead the way in the most democratic manner.
Absolutely. So Eddie, this deference to leadership, to our leaders,
yes.
And we bend the knee easily before any new power that comes along.
It's both cultural and religious. In Sierra Leone and the Gambia, you have strongly Christian and strongly Muslim countries, and in both of those countries, people can quote scripture at you about how you should pay deference or reverence to your leader. And respect your leaders. They almost tell you not to criticize your leaders. And so people can actually, some of the leaders will actually quote from scripture to justify the fact that they are there, the fact that they are chosen by God, and that the religion says you should respect and obey your leader. And so once you have that, and as I said, these are countries that have strong religious traditions, it then becomes difficult for them to go against that, because they think, I'm going against my religion. And so the two kind of become conflated, you know, thinking, you know, seeing this person as chosen by God, and then if you try and criticize them, somebody who wants to suck up to them will quote scripture at you and shut you up.
Yeah.
And so that is added to the mix, and it really does kind of sort of destroy the criticism that there should be of some of these people, in fact of many of them who are our leaders, that we are held back because of our religious beliefs.
Yeah, I'll just like to add on what Mr. Drama just said regarding how we make them seem they're godly. I'll just give example of someone who one time reached out to me telling me that, you know, Aisha, I think you have to stop pursuing justice for your dad and plus other victims, because you know why? Then I was there listening and he was like, he was the president of the Gambia, right? And he was somebody who was put in position by God, right? And for him, he feels that as a president, he could do anything he feels like doing. And he was like, I think you need to move forward and then forge on with your life. I said, but so meaning anybody who comes and become a president, he could just kill anybody and then move on because he's been seen as, you know, that superior person.
Sure.
So if we have to deal with it, so it means we can never attain the never again in the Gambia.
Yeah.
Because if anybody could just come and do that, and then we have people in our society, people we think they're friends in our families, telling victims to move on because the person is basically president and he's powerful and he could just do anything to anybody and then nothing will come out of it. I think that is quite irresponsible for us as society and us as people living in the Gambia to talk about some of these things, because at the end of the day, if that could happen, anybody could do anything to anyone, and then
absolutely. And how can one move on without justice? If you know what I mean.
Yes,
it's extremely.
If there is no justice,
Yes.
there is no moving on.
No.
And interestingly, you and I know, we all know that, of course, this was not the first Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Africa. And the South Africa one is probably the one that kind of a lot of people refer to. And what's interesting about that is that after it finished, it ran for 7 years. And after it finished, several of the families actually took the government to court because they felt that some of these perpetrators should not have been given a kind of blanket amnesty with no conditions. I mean, it was total. If you came, you confessed, there were no charges, and actually took cases all the way up to the Supreme Court to challenge them. And in fact, one case actually challenged the constitutionality of even forming the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, saying it should not have been, because it gave so much blanket amnesty to people who committed some of the most atrocious human rights abuses. There are people there confessing to having pulled somebody's teeth out of their mouth until they died. And that person finished their testimony and walked away a free man. And there were several like that. People saying, you know, we chopped off somebody's fingernails trying to get confessions out of them, their fingers rather. And so people like that. And so they were unsuccessful. But it shows you that even these commissions, they cannot satisfy anybody and they cannot satisfy everybody, because people will always feel if you give blanket amnesty, then there has been no justice.
yeah.
Absolutely. And that is really the key here. We've opted for this process.
Yeah.
Truth, reconciliation and reparations. That means that there would be amnesty for some of the perpetrators. How would that go down with the Victim Center?
Well, then, I think with amnesty, the Truth Commission, in their mandate, they have, in the TRC Act, they have amnesties outlined in the Act. But then I think the Truth Commission those that bear the highest responsibilities will not be given amnesties. Because looking at the magnitude of the crimes and how these crimes were being conducted. So if somebody, let's say for instance, if for instance the junglers who did these mass atrocities, and it even involves West African migrants, right? So I don't think it's up to the Truth Commission alone to be able to give amnesties to those people, because it involves other West African people, right? You have Ghanaians, Senegalese, and Nigerians, and I think there's also a Togolese, right? So I think those, for example, those people, I don't think the Truth Commission, after their recommendations, those people will be given amnesties because of the magnitude of the crime they committed. And then the crimes they committed is also international crimes. Torture, enforced disappearance, extrajudicial killings, and all of those things. So I think crimes against humanity, I don't think there would be amnesty for those alleged perpetrators that committed these crimes. And in terms of, Mr. Drame made mention of pursuing international courts to get justice to what happened to you. Because looking at our justice system in the Gambia, we have the laws, but most of, let's say, enforced disappearances. We can prosecute cases of enforced disappearance in the Gambia. We can prosecute cases of extrajudicial executions in the Gambia. How about torture? So we can't prosecute all those cases in the Gambia. So obviously, if the recommendations are out and victims feel that I'm not happy with the recommendations, obviously victims will pursue the international courts to see how best the international court could support them to get justice to what happened to them, especially crimes of international crimes, just the ones that I've just named. And in terms of other cases, let's say victims that went through a collective violations together. So all of those big victims as well. Let's say the April 9th victims, where Solo Sanding was also arrested. And up till now, the case is still dragging, right?
Yes. I mean, what's interesting about the Gambian case, you talk about the Solo Sanding case, but what's interesting about the Gambia case that makes it in line with what happened in Sierra Leone, what happened in South Africa, they're largely funded by outside agencies. But the Rwanda one was not. The Unification and Reconciliation Commission was turned into a permanent body. And so they did not issue a final report, but they issue annual reports. And they have done for the last 20 years, actually. They issue an annual report. And so the body is still ongoing. It's still helping people. It's still counseling victims. And you talked about the trauma you went through. Here in Africa, we don't have the kind of tradition of helping people who go through psychological trial. Most of our countries don't even have psychologists and psychoanalysts. So there's nobody to kind of help counsel people for the trauma they go through. And if the people who are going to draft the report for the Gambia, if they're listening, I think one of the recommendations they should look at is actually doing what has happened in Rwanda and say this is an ongoing process. You don't issue a report and then nothing happens, because that's the danger, and that's what happened in Sierra Leone.
Absolutely. And perhaps their secret is that because they didn't get the outside funding, then they could tailor, as it were, their processes to their own society, their own culture. You didn't have somebody else telling you what to do. But here again, the lead counsel during his summation, his final summation, you could see how he was trying to tie up the international noose, as it were, around him. If not in Gambia, in Senegal, or ECOWAS, or the ICC and stuff like that. So absolutely, they're tying down the noose.
So basically, I think it comes back to the same thing that I've said. If victims feel justice is not adequately being served to them, they could pursue those countries and see how best those countries could support them. Because a lot had happened in the Gambia. You know, for 22 years, life has been lost. And then the truth-telling process needs to still continue, right? Because a lot of people might not have the opportunity to come forward to speak about what happened to them. So as Gambians, as people, Gambians and even non-Gambians, we could still see how best we continue the truth-telling process. As Rwanda is still going through that process of healing, that process of support to victims, that process of rehabilitation to victims. Because at the end of the day, for us to move forward as a country, and I keep on saying this, we always say it's a new Gambia. But for some, it's not yet a new Gambia. Me personally, I would say it's not yet a new Gambia for me until when we attained mostly all of these things. I know truth commissions take forever. Like, it takes years for you to achieve most of the mechanisms that you have as a truth commission. But then put systems in place, right? Let there be funding to ensure that all these mechanisms are implemented. He talked about psychosocial support, which at this side of the world, we tend to, like, if you talk about psychosocial support, they will say, well, I don't think I need a psychologist, right? But victims have gone through trauma, breakdowns, right? Their family members lost their lives, and their families are still trying to heal, right? And the truth-telling process is important to these, to our future kids, the kids that are going to school. So at the end of the day, all these processes need to be incorporated in our school curriculum, because at the end of the day, history needs to be told. History needs to be told with regards to what happened in the Gambia. we can't just forget about things and move on as a country, but then the conversations need to go on with regards to what happened here and how all this sum up to those human rights violations that happen in the Gambia.
Absolutely. And here, when we, for instance, consider broadly from the testimonies that we've been hearing, what do you think has been sort of the consequences of all that damage on the way we live now? For instance, divisive politics. A lot of people now, we are talking about this ethnic background, that ethnic background, and some people might even add to it, Abdullah Sen certainly did, the decline in civility. Yes. So the debris, as it were.
Yes, I mean, you would hope that people have learned the lesson from it and not engage in the kind of divisive politics. You know, I think it's Jamaica that says, out of many, one people. And I always say, I wish they hadn't said it, then we could have stolen it and make it true. But it's not true. People are still playing on these tribal affiliations. People are still forming political parties based on that. And once you get that, it's a dangerous road. And it's something that this TRRC should have taught us to actually steer clear of, that we should not be going down that particular road. And I kept saying, and I said earlier, I hope we have learned lessons. I don't get the feeling that we have. And I just wish we had. And I think every time we should refer back to the testimonies, play them for people so they can see what the danger is of not, learning lessons of history.
Absolutely. We'll just hold it there for a minute. We're going on a short break. Don't move. Hello, welcome back to the program. Here today we are reflecting on the TRRC hearings which just ended, and I've got here my guest, Mr. Adedarami of QTV, and the Victim Centers Program Officer, Aissatou Jammeh. So gentlemen and lady, gentleman and lady, oh boy, we used to getting men all the time, it tells you. So now, moving forward, the recommendations are yet to be submitted. A lot of people are fearful of this or that. They might cherry pick as they did with the Janet Commission and stuff. And some have even said that, or the whole TRRC thing shouldn't have been done. We've heard that. And others recently are coming out to say, oh, they just used it for their own personal glorification. What do you make of these things?
Well, it's interesting because I think one of the things that's going to kind of hold Gambia's feet to the fire is that I think the international community is saying that there should not be impunity. But also the recently concluded ECOWAS 59th Heads of State Summit, several of them, for some reason, decided to address the Gambia situation and said whatever the recommendations are, make sure they are implemented. And I think they said that not idly, because they could look at Sierra Leone, 1,000-page document when it came to the recommendations, but hardly any of them have been implemented. And so that is the danger. You think, oh, this is all neatly wrapped up, we've done our job, that's it, here are the recommendations. But all of us know in Africa, what are we worst at? Implementing. We pass all sorts of laws, we validate this, we validate that, but we don't implement and we don't enforce. And that needs to change. That cannot happen in this case. It is too serious for that. It cannot happen, and we should not allow it to happen.
Absolutely. It's a same question, really.
Yeah, I think I'll just give reference to just recently, I've been in the field in the communities, basically just to sensitize people, raise awareness around reparations and reconciliation, so as to, and most of these communities will basically tell us that you know, the processes, it's good, and then people know what happened in the Gambia. But our only fear now is whether the government will fully implement these recommendations, because most of the experience is based on the Jani Commission, and then the CRC, of course. A lot of people in the communities will tell us, you know, we've contributed towards the CRC. The CRC came here, you know, we've also followed the Jani Commission, but then there was selective justice. There was selective justice done. So our fear now is, will the same thing happen to this commission? Because we've seen some of the people coming out to just contradict the work of the TRC, to say certain things about the TRC. So all of that the communities are saying. So to be honest with you, most of them had already lost hope in the process. Recommendations are not even out, but then they've already lost hope because of the experience that they've seen in other commissions that happen in the country. But then, like Mr. Drame had said, I think this is much more serious. Lives were lost, people were killed, you know, and up till now, people are leaving, especially victims of enforced disappearances. Enforced disappearance, it's always a continued violations until the remains of that person is being found. So how long are these families going to live with that? And how long are the families of the witch hunt? I could remember I visited a community in Jambur, and a lady spoke, it broke my heart. And she said, up till now, her daughters are unable to get married, because any suitor that comes to ask for their hand in marriage, they will be told that you're going to get married to a daughter, to a daughter of a witch, right? Those that were given concoctions to drink. And the stigma is still in those communities, right? The community is so divided to a point that they don't even have normal conversations because they've been termed as being witches. So only the recommendations of the Truth Commission could help Gambia to move forward, to ensure that all these crimes that had happened, all the victims, all the recommendations that they're going to make as per the TRC should be implemented. Because if not, it's going to be serious.
Absolutely. I mean, the deeper social damage, the stigma, people's lives have been destroyed, really.
It has been.
Totally destroyed.
Totally.
And interestingly, when we were talking about doing this program, I decided, some people say take the punishment, of not only reading both the South Africa and the Rwanda cases, but I then went and read all the criticisms of them. And the same phrase ran through both. And is remarkable because they were quoting different people, but several of them said, I will never think there has been justice because I have not been able to find the body of my loved one and bury that person and giving them a fitting sending off. They said, until that happens, I will never accept that there has been justice. And that was completely two different countries, but that's, and it's the same here in the Gambia. I think people will never accept that because, as we said, in some cases you kill somebody who was the head of the household. You've effectively destroyed that family. You tarnish somebody's name by branding them a witch. And then because of, it's the way we are in this part of the world, we believe in these things. And so it never goes away. Even after the perpetrator has gone, has left the country, that stain will remain on you and your family. And as we've heard from your daughters who are hoping to get married, you're like, oh no, these are the daughters of a witch.
Absolutely. I mean, the Victim Center, I mean, you provide support. How hard has it been? Have you been getting funding? How hard has it been trying to provide support for these victims?
Well, we obviously write proposals and then we apply for funding and then we come up with concept proposals, and which that is how we sometimes get offered these funding to be able to support these victims. So we support them in terms of interim reparations, we call it, because we've seen the magnitude of how this violation had affected these victims, especially medically, psychologically. So we have a psychosocial support unit as part of a project that the Victim Center had, and then we put them through some form of counseling and guidance to basically bring them back to that state of mind, because they're relieving all of these things again. And then like if you take the head of the family, so the kids are there. So we also help these kids with school support. So we have a component of the work that we do is to through a need assessment program. So we put through these kids and then we help them with little school fees for them to be able to pay their school fees. And as part of the main work that we do is to advocate for justice, to get justice for victims. We go to the communities and enlighten them more about, because what happens is people need to understand these things. When you talk about reparations, a lot of the time people will like it's monetary, right? So as part of the work that we do, we reach out to those victims in their various communities to basically enlighten them about the different form of reparations and how the TRC, because TRC, they have a reparations policy, and who is entitled for reparations, all is included in the policy. So because if you get reparated, doesn't mean that you could stop there as a victim. If you get reparated, if you want to seek justice, further justice, prosecutions, you have all right to prosecute. Reparation is a right, it's not a privilege. So we tend to make them aware of some of these things, because sometimes you hear statements, people say, if you give money to the victims, they're okay. They, just give them some sum of money and then they will be fine. But it doesn't stop to that. You could further prosecute a case in court. You could further ask for a rehabilitation. You could further ask for restitution if in case you've lost something. You could further say, I want closure, right? All of those things are part of transitional justice processes. So,
do you get help from government?
Well, to be honest, since we started the Victim Center, we've never had any funding coming from the government. All our funding are from international organizations and our partners. We even had funding from the German government. Our first funding was from the German government, which had helped the Victim Center to where it is today. Even our premises was being funded through the German funding, and then even our database that we had an MOU with the TRC with, which we were sharing, was through the German government. So, but on the side of the government, we just have stakeholder relationship with the Minister of Justice when we, basically talk about some of these issues. But there is no tangible funding given to the Victim Center to support in the process.
Absolutely, not even in kind. Yeah. Recently, we've been reading in the papers that Arch 22 was going to be renamed Memorial Arch, which some of us thought it was very, very fitting, because this edifice that sort of was supposed to represent your triumph, suddenly going to be changed into your monument of shame, as it were, but shelved.
Many of us welcomed it when we heard it first and thought, this is a brilliant idea. It could work. And they've given all sorts of reasons as to why it was shelved. They didn't consult with the line ministry, which is Ministry of Justice. Seems a kind of feeble reason. They should have said, okay, we weren't consulted, but we think it's a brilliant idea. Let's go ahead with it. And so you wonder whether people are playing politics and are waiting to either after the report comes out or after the elections before making a decision, because they think that if they do it ahead of the elections, people might use it for all sorts of reasons. Both the pro and anti group will do it. And so, as you rightly said, from the reports we're getting, it's been shelved. But then again, they've gone so far as to say it was all a rumor anyway. according to the Ministry of Justice. And in fact, I saw the statement from the minister saying the first I heard about it was when I read it in the newspapers. And so you wonder whether it was true in the first place. But true or not, many of us thought it was a good idea and should be one that should be pursued.
Absolutely. Well, it was a rumor, but now you know. You see what you do about it. So this is it. I said to a lot of people are scared that the politicking, especially we're in the year of presidential elections, the politicking would get in the way of doing the right thing.
Yeah, it's sad. It's rather unfortunate, you know, going through social media and then seeing a lot of things around politics, you know, also talking about the transitional justice process included in the politics, you know. I think it's rather unfortunate that all of these things are happening. But then, like I said earlier, I think this whole transitional justice process, especially the TRRC, would give Gambia a different face, right? And I think if all the politicians are listening to me, I think this should be a break point for Gambia. If these recommendations are treated 100%. So I'll always, like, sometimes I would even say, I think politicians need to even think through the whole the TRC process. It should be a lesson learned for each and every aspiring politician who wants to be a president in the Gambia. Because what had happened here is mass, right? And if you want to put politics in it, we can't achieve the never again. Because at the end of the day, you have to compromise, right? So if you want to just, you know, talk on behalf of, let's say, the TRC, and then you put politics in it, you can achieve what you intend to. You can achieve what you want in the future. Because at the end of the day, you have to choose in between the two, right? I'm running for president. So I should make sure that the things that happened in the Gambia for the past 22 years, I should make sure these recommendations will be implemented by my government. So it could even be a campaign promise, right? So I think us as Gambians need to hold our politicians accountable. Anybody who comes to me and say, okay, I want you to vote for me. Okay, fine. Let's come up with a document so as to you signed it, right? If the TRC is over, their recommendation, this is what they recommend, then you sign. Then in the event that you become president, we hold you accountable based on that. I think if we do that as Gambians, we would achieve what we want. But if we don't, because we all know how politicians will just come and say, I'll do this and I'll do that, I'll do that, I'll do that. And at the end of the day, they don't. Let's have them sign a document so as to we hold them accountable. Other countries do it, right? If they don't, we come out in the streets and make them do things.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the counterweight here, and would be civil society.
I think civil society has to hold them to account. I was hoping you wouldn't say that they should have it as a campaign promise, because unless it's a campaign promise signed in blood,
yes,
I don't think most people now will believe campaign promises by politicians. But unfortunately, I think that is exactly what is going to happen. I think almost every politician from every party bar one will say, I will enforce the recommendations of the TRRC. And there's a danger there, because if they say that, this is where we step in as civil society, say, okay, supposing they say you have to give reparations of certain amount, how are you going to fund it? How is it going to be costed? Because you can make that empty promise, even in your manifesto. How are you going to deliver on it? And if you tell us how you're going to deliver on it, come the election and you win, we will then say, okay, you've now won. Let us see you do it. Okay. That is what we have to do. And that is what it doesn't tend to happen, but it should happen, and it must happen in this case.
Absolutely.
On paper.
I'm promised to do that. So now we are coming towards the end. Is there any aspect of the whole hearings that really you hold dear that I haven't touched?
Well, I think the aspect that I think you haven't touched, maybe when we talk about gender justice, right? I think gender justice is key to the entire process. And we also, it's also important that the TRC, if they're drafting their recommendations, that needs to be considered. I know they have a gender unit at the TRRC, which they're tirelessly working with the women group to support them in terms of helping them with psychosocial support. But also in the context of our society, how we live with these women in our society, we tend to see families will interfere. Let's say, let me take an example of an enforced disappearance widow, right, who lost her husband. A lot of times, like if decisions need to be made, we'll see how the family members will interfere and speak on behalf of this woman who lost her husband, right? So if, let's say, if, for example, if reparations are to be paid, the TRC has a reparations policy, fine, but also the family could come and say, you know, she's just a wife. Let's give that leadership role to these women because they've gone through a lot. Their husbands were killed, right? Their husbands were enforced disappeared, so were extrajudicially executed. And they're living with their kids, though the extended family of the man is still there, right? But let's give them that leadership role so that they could, reparations might mean differently to the woman, and it might also mean differently to the entire family, right? The woman might say, reparations for me is to exhume the body of my loved one, right? Reparation would mean to the other family, let's just be compensated for what we've lost, right? So I think families need to start having these conversations around some of these things, because at the end of the day, it will be something that you need to agree as a family, right, to give this woman that space, to give the woman that empowerment to be able to also make decision on behalf of the violation that happened to him or her, to her rather.
Yeah. Absolutely. And are they?
Yes, I know we're running out of time, but quickly, I mean, and again, I'm sorry, apologize, I keep mentioning Rwanda, but in time, trying to kind of address and redress what happened in Rwanda, it's no coincidence that Rwanda now has in the world the highest number of female parliamentarians, 69%. It's a record. No country even comes close to Rwanda. And Gambia has one of the lowest. Think about that. Because in Rwanda, they realized that women suffered disproportionately, and they're doing something to address and redress it. They're not just talking about it.
Absolutely. So we've sobering thought there. People should think about it. And the women, you see, for me, I'm just thinking of Tufa's evidence, her testimony, and it was really very, very sad. We've come to the end. Thank you very much, Adedarame, and thank you very much, Esatu Jame, for joining me here today. Quite sobering. I don't think I've recovered from all the testimonies we heard, and the future is uncertain, but united we stand and we'll conquer it. Thank you very much, viewers, for joining us today on this reflection on the TRRC. Until next time, I'm Mudu Mbuch. Goodbye.